I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. On this week's episode, we'll cover the running back room rotation. Which first-year starter are you expecting the most out of in 2021? Scott Stricklin's scheduling method gets a nice in-depth look from Andy Staples at The Athletic. And we saw a KOPPELMAN tweet about Tim Tebow that Will wanted to cover here this week, and we'll look into that at a dollar. But Will, first, we'll dive into two bits here. And we want to get into this running back room situation. There's too much talent in this room this year that someone's going to walk away unhappy with their usage. Is there another way? What we want to figure out is, who do you think will be potentially left out, quote unquote, and how do you best maximize the talent in the running back room this year?
I mean, I think the person who's pretty obviously going to get left out is Naquan Wright. He was the guy getting third down carries. He was the guy getting thrown to out of the backfield last year when Dameon Pierce and Malik Davis left the game. I would suspect that Lorenzo Lingard, DeMarcus Bowman, if nothing else, are going to displace him. And so I would look for him to make contributions on punt returns and kick returns. That's really a place he's shifty enough and fast enough that you figure he'd be able to, in the open field, be able to maybe make something out of those. Punt returns in particular is a place where I think he might be really good. And then there's been some talk. David Wunderlich wrote something over at Gator Country last week about Malik Davis going out to the slot. It's not necessarily a new concept, thinking that he might do that. Obviously, caught 31 balls last year, and so it's not a foreign concept for him to be out there catching the ball. But that kind of means that the receivers are probably struggling for Florida if you're taking Malik Davis out there. I think you probably see more two-back sets. I think you see a better rotation. I think you see guys get 10 carries against, the Charleston Southerns of the world, and then, sort of spread the wealth. And then maybe it goes to Bowman and Lingard and Pierce and Davis. There's just not going to be enough balls to go around. Somebody's going to sit out. Somebody's going to be unhappy. But it is the place where Florida has excess talent. So maybe they move people off of the backfield.
I know there hasn't been the elite production with Pierce and Davis out of the backfield, but I don't think anyone would look at that running back room prior to this season and say, we're really struggling. I don't think it's I think it's maybe the system and the offense wasn't tailored so much to it. Whereas you got a guy we've talked about a million times with Emory Jones going to change the look of this offense this year. No matter who the running backs are, it's going to be a beneficiary. But with Bowman coming in and with Lingard really stepping up this year, hopefully that is going to take a lot of touches away. But man, Wright had some nice moments last year. Do you like him as a third down back potentially?
No. I mean, he only averaged 3.9 yards per carry. You look at Pierce and Davis, they were both at 4.7. Not as many carries. He had 54 carries. Davis had 66. Pierce had 106. But considering that Wright had some really nice runs, he also had a lot of runs where he didn't get a whole lot of yards. Mm-hmm. And when you think about the kind of running back you would want in an offense where you've got somebody like Emory Jones and you're sort of deciding based on the defensive alignment whether the running back gets the ball or Jones is going to keep it, you need somebody who's going to be able to beat the linebacker or the safety in the hole. And Wright didn't necessarily show that skill last year. When they got him on the outside, he was able to show that skill. Again, that's sort of why I think the punt return is maybe the place where he really makes his mark and really can contribute. It's been a long time since Florida's blocked a punt or blocked a field goal attempt or an extra point or something like that. And so there's probably an opportunity to contribute there. But the reality is I think Pierce and Davis are going to be fighting to keep Lingard and Bowman off the field. I just don't suspect that Wright, based on what he's already shown, is going to get the kinds of carries or the kinds of opportunities and the kinds of targets. Again, if you're talking about shifting Davis out into the slot, then would you think about shifting Wright out there? I mean, they're not really that different in size, and Wright seems to be a little bit more quick change of direction than Malik Davis is. And so maybe you put him sort of in that slot, Kadarius Toney type of situation. Seemed to have good hands last year, 19 catches. But, I think we all sort of trust that Dan Mullen's going to do what he going to be able to put these guys in a situation to succeed. At the same time, he often favors upperclassmen. So maybe we're wrong in assuming that Bowman and Lingard are going to go flying past these guys. But you can't bring in a guy like DeMarcus Bowman and not play him. I mean, the whole point of having that guy is that you're going to have him out there and have them ready to go in that game against Alabama, the game against LSU, and the game against Georgia. That, though, maybe does color the way they do things. Maybe you spread the carries around to make sure Bowman's ready for those three. But at the end of the day, I think all Gator fans want to see Bowman step up, want to see Bowman get a lion's share of the carries and have a guy, I was kind of thinking back to when's the last time we had a running back who really got people excited? I mean, are we talking C4? talking theatric face on? Is that the last time we had somebody who was an exciting guy at the running back position?
With that type of explosion who could break a long run like that. I mean, we've certainly had some good running backs over the years, but with the type of hype that Bowman has coming in, it's been quite a while. But one thing I do want to comment on, I see a major difference between Bowman and Lingard in that Lingard played on this roster last year. Was he just too new? Is that why he didn't get a lot of looks last year? We did not see him get many carries. I mean, there's plenty of games where he could have gotten action, and we didn't see it last year, Will.
Yeah, so I don't know what to make of that. I think you can say that about everybody on the defensive side of the ball, too. One of the things we kept waiting for as the defense struggled was that eventually that Mullen and Grantham were going to decide to make some changes on that side of the ball. They kept saying they get it fixed. They kept saying that things were developing, that they were getting better. And then it just never improved. And really, it was kind of the same way with the running game, right? I mean, the first couple of games, Florida couldn't run the ball. And you're like, okay, well, once they get into that stretch where they're playing Vanderbilt and Tennessee and Kentucky, you figure that they'll start, that they'll really start working on that running game and getting it to work. And they just never could. And they didn't bring in Lingard at any point along the year. You wonder whether it's the same reason that they didn't bring in defensive backs to help out guys like Marco Wilson and Donovan Steiner. When those guys mess things up, it took a really long time for them to bring in younger guys. And again, it's not like they were hurting at the running back position. And then the other thing is that last year, especially, pass protection was probably more important for the running backs than anything they actually did with the ball in their hands, right?
That's a good point.
Considering you look at the offensive line and how they struggled in pass protection, particularly on the right side, having a running back in there who was ready to pick things up, who knew what his job was and can free up Trask, what was a critical thing. And Dameon Pierce was really somebody who was good at that. Is that going to be as emphasized this year? I don't think it will be, but at the same time, you're going to need somebody who can make sure that Emory Jones isn't getting hit, because regardless of who your quarterback is, if he gets hit from behind, the ball's going to come out, you're going to turn the ball over, and it's going to be a big problem. So, that's if you see one of those guys not playing, you probably know that it has something to do with pass protection and less to do with their running ability, because all these guys are pretty good. But the one I think who will get squeezed out is probably Naquan Wright. He just, from a yards per carry average, he was not as explosive as the other two. And so I think as you bring in more explosive players, he's the guy who's going to see his playing time diminish.
That's a bummer. I like his running style too. I like the little bit that we did get to see from him. I liked him last year. I can see why you go with Wright though out of that situation, but I do want to say, it would not surprise me if Pierce and Davis made it awfully tough for some of these guys. I know we all want Bowman and Lingard to break through, but it would not surprise me if Pierce and Davis put up a little fight. And I just see that to be a very deep running back room, but looking forward to seeing that in 2021. Will, let's move on to 4 bits. Which first-year starter are you expecting the most out of in 2021?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this a little bit before we came on, just to make sure we weren't picking the same guys. And the big thing and we actually weren't, right? I mean, the one for me is Gervon Dexter. I think at defensive tackle, he had 20 tackles last year, 2 tackles for loss and a half a sack, which doesn't sound like a lot, but for a true freshman who comes in, doesn't have a spring practice, has sort of a fall practice where they're trying to get everybody ready, and then can come in and showed flashes last year of his ability, but was never really a starter behind Kyrie Campbell and Tadaro Slayton. Well, now he needs to step in, and I know we've got the 2 transfers in Newkirk and Valentino, but at the same time, Gervon Dexter is the guy with the pedigree, and he's the guy who can really be disruptive on the inside. And one of the things that Florida's been missing really since Adam Schuler left is anybody who can be reasonably disruptive up front. And even when Schuler was there, he wasn't a massive disruptive force. He was more solid at that position, but it was enough to allow the rest of Grantham's defense to be pretty good, at least until they played the big boys and then struggled in some of those situations when Jake Fromm was the quarterback. So that's the guy I'm going for. I really do think that Gervon Dexter sort of controls the future of Todd Grantham's career. I mean, I think if Dexter gets hurt or if Dexter doesn't play very well, then Grantham likely is going to be run out of Florida with pitchforks. If Dexter plays really well and turns into the star that everybody thinks he can be, then I think Todd Grantham's going to be on the list for head coaching positions next year at other places in college football. Because at the end of the day, up front is always the thing that's made his defenses go. And if Dexter can be a force who brings double teams, then you've got guys like Brenton Cox. You've got guys like Zachary Carter, who all of a sudden can get more pressure on the ends because they can't cheat off the middle. because when they do, then Dexter's going to have a straight line to the quarterback, and that's just not going to be a tenable situation. It's been a long time. I mean, I'm thinking like Sharif Floyd, Dominique Easley, in terms of really getting excited about a defensive tackle at Florida. They've had some good ones, but those are sort of the two guys that I think of in terms of like the last dominant defensive tackles at Florida. And if Dexter can turn into that dominant player, then I think the defense could be really good.
He's definitely got the build to where you look at him and go, he could absolutely develop into that first round NFL talent if things go right. I love the additions. We talked about this on the Research Room on the Read and Reaction YouTube channel. Be sure to check it out last week with Robert Parker. The additions of Antonio Shelton from Penn State, Daquan Newkirk, I think those additions help Dexter tremendously because it takes all the pressure. Without those additions, it's all on Dexter. Sophomore year, good luck. You're in the fire 100%. How much do you think being protected by those veteran transfers will help the young guy come along?
I mean, I think it's going to give him less total reps. It'll allow him to be fresher when he's out there, to be explosive in the reps that he has. Neither one of those guys, I think they're solid Power 5 guys. I don't think we should expect, 8 sacks and a bunch of disruptive plays from either one of those guys. I think you might be able to expect that from Dexter, right? So I think that's really where it in the SEC, the more guys you can rotate in and keep everybody fresh up front, it's okay if Dexter has to sit out a series if you've got guys who can hold their own, and then that allows him to be fresher in the fourth quarter. It allows him to be fresher, at the end of the half. It allows him throughout the season, but also when the opposing offense goes into a 2-minute drill, you don't just have somebody who's sucking wind because he's been out there the entire half. And for all the criticism that Slayton and Campbell got last year, there wasn't anybody else, right? I mean, those were the guys who had to be out there and had to be out there a ton. And in that A&M game, we saw it, right? I mean, I think they had Dante Lucas out there playing linebacker, defensive line, just because they didn't have anybody left when A&M was going up and down the field and really sort of running the ball down their throat. That shouldn't be a problem as long as they're able to stay healthy. But that's the big thing, right? Is those guys have to stay healthy. Otherwise, all the stuff we talked about in terms of rotations and things like that go out the window. And Dexter's going to have to be good, and he's going to have to play every play.
Yeah, I mean, I do like the idea they at least prioritize that position to seemingly help protect and develop. I think it will help Dexter's development as we go in the season, puts less pressure on him up front. Maybe get some veteran advice from those guys too, coming from Auburn and Penn State. Will, my pick for this position is probably shared among a lot of the fan base here, but Jason Marshall at corner. It was a rough year in the secondary, rough year in the defense in general, but you get that real second corner coming in, and guys are freshmen, true freshmen, expected to contribute from day one. That's a lot of pressure to put on a kid coming out of high school.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, there's been some talk of Avery Helm and Finley Graham and those sorts of guys stepping in. But let's be honest, Marshall's the guy who's the first round talent. And when Florida's been able to bring in guys to that level over the last few years, they've been pretty successful, right? I mean, you look at Kyrie Elam over on the other side as somebody who came in halfway through the season, stepped in and was able to really make a name for himself. And then you look at CJ Henderson came in, had a bunch of pick sixes early on in his career, and then was basically a consensus top 10 pick like before he even played his junior season. We've had a few misses too. I mean, Marco Wilson obviously had a checkered career there at Florida, but was also injured very early on after he showed some real flashes and certainly had the athletic ability. So, I mean, that's the thing, right? As you look at Marshall and you figure worst case scenario, you're getting Marco Wilson in terms of ability, like the sort of true freshman Marco Wilson. But Wilson didn't have this kind of pedigree, right? Wilson was somewhere in like 100 to 150 national rank. Marshall is one of these guys that the scouts think is can't miss. I think when you watch his tape, you see that. And so the question is, can that translate? The nice part is boundary corners or outside corners tend to be more read and reaction type of plays. I mean, obviously, if you're playing a zone, things get a little bit different. But if you're as good as you think he can be, and Elam's as good as we know he is, then you don't really have to play a whole lot of zone, right? You should be able to play a lot of man out there on the outside, and he has the skills to do that.
Well, we'll get to see him early, week 3 against Alabama. I feel like we bring it up on every single show, but we'll get to see that early. Let's move on to 6 bits here. Andy Staples wrote a piece in The Athletic called the name of the article was Florida AD Scott Stricklin's scheduling manifesto would make college football better. Will people listen? And I just want to take a moment to point out the fact that we're talking about the way the Florida Gators schedule football would benefit football games would benefit the rest of college football. You're not having this conversation 3 years ago. This is all about all the recent scheduling that Strickland's done that's brought attention to the program. I'm psyched for these future series. I think with the idea of an expanding playoff coming, the idea that we're going to go out to Utah and Arizona State, Colorado, play a lot of different teams we don't normally play, I think that's going to benefit Florida and keep them on the map of the playoff committee.
Yeah, it's actually one of the more convincing arguments that I've heard for a playoff. I mean, obviously, I don't think you or I are really in favor of expansion out to 12 teams, but if it's going to happen, one of the things you hope that happens with that is that teams are going to schedule very, very strong schedules, because it doesn't kill them to lose, say, this is the point that Staples makes in the article, is that it wouldn't kill Florida to go lose in Columbus to Ohio State, that doesn't drop them out of the national championship chase. But that's a little bit of a false herring, or a little bit of a red herring, because losing to Ohio State in Columbus wouldn't kick you out of the national championship race either if you just come back and win your SEC games. And so I don't know. I'm sort of on the fence with this one, because until the committee shows that they're going to put in a 2 or a 3 loss team over a 1 loss team or an undefeated team that's played a just simple schedule, I don't think you're going to see anything like this. I mean, you think back to Virginia Tech in 1999, didn't really play a really tough schedule, got to play Florida State in the national championship, gave Florida State a pretty good run in that national championship game with Michael Vick. At the same time, the schedule was pretty much a cakewalk. You look at Clemson for the past 5 or 6 years, just sort of running through the ACC, and South Carolina hasn't been all that great, and there hasn't been a whole lot of incentive for them to schedule. And these games that you're talking about, the home and homes, were all scheduled, I think, under the auspices that there was going to be a 4 or a 6, maybe there'd be expansion to 6 or something like that. I'm not sure anybody was necessarily looking, saying, oh, it's going to be 12. And so, is there really going to be a benefit to having, Utah on the schedule, or is it really just risk? And that's one of the things. There was also some mention in the article of it would be useful for Florida to play UCF and USF and make that a regular thing and those sorts of things. And it's like, okay, well, where's the incentive for Florida to do that other than to help UCF
it would be
and
useful
USF
for those schools? Yeah.
Well, so again, I mean, that what you're doing then by scheduling these home and homes with other Power 5 teams is you're starving the rest of the college football landscape for these big matchups, right? Like Cupcakes coming into Florida, getting destroyed and getting paid $1 million for coming, keeps those programs going. And the dynamics of how college football work, the dynamics of where the television money goes, and all those things are changing. I can't really predict how they're going to change, but I look at it's an interesting set of principles that Staples sort of outlines that Strickland has. I just don't know that it's actually going to work.
Let's go over those. He has 3 main tenets to the article here. Strickland says tenet number 1. All Power 5 schools should play 11 meaningful games each season. Tenet number 2, schedule should have some opponents who are annual in order to maintain a rivalry series, but a majority of the opponents should rotate regularly to prevent staleness and fan fatigue. And tenet number 3, all kickoff times should be announced in the spring prior to the season. I'm a huge fan of number 3. Like, let me plan my college football days out. Maybe I could make 2 games in one day, But I think I understand why the TV networks want to wait, and then we won't have a bunch of terrible 8 p.m. kickoffs throughout the season. But I think overall, these ideas need to take root in college football. Play 11 meaningful games. Yes, that's great. As great as it is to be a Florida Gators fan and watch Florida Gators football, there's been a lot of years where you play your East Tennessee State to open the season, followed by Charleston Southern, and then in the week before the Florida State game, you got like the Citadel. And those games are tough to get up for. They really mean nothing. They mean nothing to the fan base. And I think if you're looking too at an overall changing environment, this isn't just about the playoff. This is about getting people off their butts to get into your stadium and spend some money. because I think it's so great nowadays. You can watch any college football game. You can be just as happy watching a game at home. And I think playing these top games, I'm a lot more interested in going to watch a home game against like Arizona State than I would be against Charleston Southern. So I think that the idea too of rotating some of these games in terms of, I think that attacks the ideas of divisions. So do I want to play Georgia the last week of October or the first week in November every single year in Jacksonville? Yes. Do I want to play Florida State every single season at the last game of the season? Yes. Other than that, I'm kind of game to switch things up around the schedule. How you feel about that, Will?
I mean, I don't mind mixing up the schedule. That's all well and good. I mean, we when the SEC changed into divisions, the Auburn rivalry was lost in some capacity, but Florida has built up a rivalry with LSU that now sort of dwarfs, in my mind, the Auburn rivalry before. And maybe people who were more invested in that one to start with feel a little bit differently, but hey, it is what it is.
Is LSU our best rivalry over the last 2 decades in terms of quality of games and matchups, in terms of both teams being relevant at the time of playing? I think it might be.
So the LSU game is interesting because it's uniquely placed in the middle of the season where you've sort of played your cupcakes. You maybe had that Tennessee game, but the Tennessee game hasn't really been a measure of how good anybody is.
Right.
The teams are usually coming in with 1 or 0 losses when they come in. And so it tells you what you've got, right? In 2018, when Florida lost, or when Florida lost to LSU, that told you something about the team. In 2019, they're able to beat them. That tells you something about, or I'm sorry,
way around.
I got those reversed.
Yeah.
And then 2020 last year, it tells you something. Obviously, the 3 and 5. It's just always it's always going to be rough, right? Those games were weird. It's one of those weird things where you just know something odd's always going to happen. I think going back to what you were saying, though, the reality is, so all that is well and good, right? Setting the times makes sense. That helps fans get in the stands, helps fans plan, helps the fan experience. I honestly think, though, that's PR. That's not really what people care about. What the administrators care about is dollars. And the people who are missing last year in those games that were cupcakes were not the people who are alums who are paying the Bull Gator fees to be able to be eligible to buy season tickets. It was the students. And so the amount of money that you make off of a student who comes into the stadium is relatively minimal. I think what you're sort of seeing, and maybe this is the cynic in me, but I think what you're seeing is laying the groundwork for saying, we tried to schedule better and the students still aren't showing up. We're going to convert those into suites. And that there's going to be because let's be honest, I don't think there's any way they're going to be able to dictate to the TV networks what time the games are actually going to be. I just don't think that they're going to be able to do that, right? I mean, if you've got Patriots Broncos or something, that's a game that people are going to be interested in, regardless of whether the Patriots are any good and the Broncos are any good. So you put that on Monday night or you put that on Sunday night, the NFL knows that's going to be a major matchup. Florida, Georgia, obviously you can sort of do that the same way, but Florida State has been a clunker for the last 3 or 4 years. And really even before that, because Florida wasn't very good.
Yeah.
Right. So
it's been a while.
We're going on a decade where that game really hasn't meant anything.
Yeah.
And you're telling me that you want them to put that in prime time without knowing what else is going on. It also means you eliminate the ability of teams that don't get the national exposures. Like if Iowa State comes out firing next year and ends up 8-0 and is playing some big game against Oklahoma or something 3/4 of the way through the season, are you telling me that game starts at noon because we decided to schedule it at noon before, even though the network might want to move it to late? It's just, at the end of the day, the contract that they sign is going to be with a television partner where the goal is to maximize revenue. And that means that there's going to need to be flex and there's going to need to be able to make adjustments and those sorts of things. And I'm just not sure they're going to allow them to get rid of it.
You've seen the Pac-12 speak out against some of this noon scheduling too, where, I mean, even like Oregon going into Ohio State, I know Fox is with their big noon kickoff deal, but Oregon at Ohio State should probably not be a noon kickoff. Those guys are West Coast. Like, that's not really totally fair to the Oregon kids, but also that should be an 8 p.m. kickoff. Oregon and Ohio State. That shouldn't be that should be like or at worst a 3:30 kickoff. That should be more of a primetime kickoff. Like, I know Fox is trying to market it differently, and to some extent, I think it's successful in season, especially when you have Big Ten versus Big Ten opponents. I think some of that works, but I don't know. It's some of this college football is a little goofy with their scheduling right now.
They weren't complaining about the schedule when they got the check. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. All these teams made a boatload of money, even in the middle of the pandemic last year. And at no point was anyone complaining as they cashed the check. They're only complaining about how can we make it better. Now, if they can partner with their television partners to make the games better and say, hey, let's announce it 4 weeks at a time, right? Where we can make sure that you've got something that, your fans are excited about and everybody knows and can set their travel plans and those sorts of things. And then, so like right now, right, we all know when the Alabama game is, we all know when the Georgia game is.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can make some plans based on that. And for the most part, you kind of know the way the SEC, like we all knew that the Alabama game was going to be 3:30 because there was no way CBS was going to exercise their 8 p.m. option that early in the season. And so you knew that was going to have to be 3:30 because the SEC owned it. Now that goes away a little bit when ESPN takes over everything. But again, I go back to the money is enormous. These guys are driven by money. I'm not ascribing malice. I'm just ascribing people responding to incentives. And at the end of the day, Stricklin's job isn't to make the fan experience better. Stricklin's job is to maximize revenue. And what he's going to end up doing is doing what's best to maximize revenue. Now that might mean putting more students in the seats. That might mean generating a better environment. It might mean a whole host of different things. But I would be surprised if fan experience is the priority, especially if it means compromising on television dollars. I think television dollars are going to be first.
I think there are a lot of fans who come to Gainesville 2+ hour drive, maybe an hour and a half, at least an hour and a half drive away from, you talk about Jacksonville, Orlando, Tampa area. A lot of fans making a little bit of a trek to get to Gainesville for a game day. And, people make a weekend out of it. Everybody does it differently. But if you have those games, that 11 meaningful games versus those 3 games a season that have been, it seems like for the last, 15, 20 years, the Gators pretty much have those 3 games a season that are just guaranteed cupcake games. I think that does make it more attractive as a fan, especially for the casual fans to make their way up to Gainesville on game day. So I don't want to put that all on the students' lap, Will, but the students could maybe be at fault, especially at like those noon games. They don't roll in right away at those noon kickoffs. I know that, but I like the idea of scheduling more against the Power 5 opponents and having those games that you really get excited about. Plus the idea of taking a road trip somewhere to go to, say, Salt Lake City in a couple of years and go see what Utah's all about and, exposing the brand further west. I got to think that's going to help with recruiting, that you're not just staying in the Southeast at all times. So I think there's a lot of benefits to what Scott Stricklin's doing. And I also think it speaks a lot to what he's done here in Gainesville, that there's any writer willing to write an article on what the Florida AD is doing about college football scheduling, it being for the better of college football. So I got a kick out of that.
Well, I mean, Stanley does have connections at Florida, right?
Yeah, I know.
It's
Staples,
not,
yeah.
Staples does have
Staples
does have connections at Florida, so it's not as though he's not connected. And again, this is sort of a silly season. Like I always talk about off-season lies, where everybody's saying, "Oh, this guy looks great in camp," and then you don't see him all year long. And I do wonder whether you put this stuff out there, you float it, and you see how other people feel about it, and sort of get the temperature of the room, and then you can make changes. Right? No negotiation ever starts out by saying, "Hey, this is what I want," and that's exactly what you want. It always starts out by saying, "Hey, I want 11 meaningful games," and maybe you end up with 9, right? Mm-hmm. But 9 was better than 8, or 10 was better than 8, and you're able to get more than maybe you asked for. But it is a little bit of talking out of both sides of the mouth, though, because we could have had home and homes with USF and UCF based on the way those schools were asking for things, and those didn't come to fruition. I think rightly so, because there wasn't a whole lot in it for UF. And that's kind of, I think, where this is going to lie. It's each school and each conference is going to do what's best for itself, because they're not part of one. They're not the NFL, right? The NFL gets the owners together and they vote and do all sorts of things. But at the end of the day, the owners decide to do what's best for the overall league. At least that's the idea. Not what's best for the Dallas Cowboys, or not what's best for the NFC East. College football is different, right? Because the SEC is going to do what's best for the SEC. The SEC is going to sign a television contract, and that may mean that they do things differently than the Pac-12 or the Big Ten or the Big 12, just because of the way their relationships are set up.
I'd love to see the Gators playing a September road game in the big house at Ann Arbor, going out to doing a whiteout at Penn State like Auburn's going to do this year. I'd love to see some different games like that on the schedule. So I like the direction. Either way, it might be baby steps like you're saying, but either way, I like the direction. All right, we got to move on. Let's go to $1. Brian Koppelman, the co-creator, showrunner for Billions on Showtime, he had a tweet. Tim Tebow and I would almost definitely not like each other in real life. The prism through which we see the world is so different. Yet I think he got such a raw deal from the NFL, and that he would have figured out how to win if given the chance. So I don't know, the little bit of a backhanded compliment, I guess, a little bit of an actual compliment toward the end, but I know this is a tweet that got you a little fired up and you wanted to talk on it a little bit, Will. So you got the floor.
I mean, so it's interesting. His take on the quarterbacking, I think he's actually wrong. I mean, Tebow was a first-round draft pick, was given opportunities to start, won a bunch of games, and that's sort of his argument is that Tebow's a winner, which in some cases I agree with, right? That I do believe that Tebow had just a really unbelievable ability to sort of pull games out that he shouldn't have otherwise and had no reason to do. And it made it really fun, especially when you got to see Merrill Hodges' head explode when he was trying to explain afterwards on ESPN how Tebow wasn't any good. But, the reality that he didn't get a fair shake, he went to multiple teams. He had opportunities to switch positions. He could have made the switch to tight end earlier, made quite a bit of money, both on the field and off. So I don't feel sorry for Tim Tebow. I don't think anybody should feel sorry for Tim Tebow. The thing that got me about the tweet is that he started out by saying, I don't think we'd like each other because we're so different, or something along those lines. And it's just, it's sad to me that somebody would immediately say, I don't like someone because ostensibly because he's a Christian and because he's got conservative views and those sorts of things. And at the end of the day, I don't recall Tebow pushing for any sort of law that codifies any of his religious beliefs. I don't recall Tebow asking Brian Koppelman to do something against his will. I think at the end of the day, Tebow basically said, hey, I'm going to start a giant foundation that helps special needs kids. And how could you not like a guy who's trying to help special needs kids? Like, whether you agree with all of his politics or not, he's trying to help kids who otherwise are overlooked and disregarded. And I just think that's something where I want people like that in my life, even if I don't agree with them politically. And if Tebow was somebody who was like extraordinarily left wing, I'd say the same thing, right? If there's somebody out there extraordinarily left wing who's helping children, helping people who are less fortunate, let's applaud them. Let's talk to them. And then, hey, once you become friends, you can have a discussion about politics and either agree to disagree or just say, hey, we're not going to talk about that. We'll still be friends. I don't know. It struck me as weird that you would have to, that he had to put the caveat on there of, I wouldn't like this guy, but he got a short shaft as a quarterback. I'm like, first off, you're wrong. I don't think he got short shafted as a quarterback. But even if you do assume that maybe the Jets and Rex Ryan did a terrible job of using him, and that maybe if they'd have done a better job, he would have gotten more opportunities. At the same time, like, just to come out and say with the caveat of, I'm not going to like him, it almost felt like one of those guys who like praises a conservative writer and then immediately gets canceled. Because it's like, you can't say that about, like, you can't say you actually like a conservative. I'm like, conservative, libertarian, liberal, I don't care. Like, is the person a good person? And I've never heard anyone say anything other than Tim Tebow is a great person. And until I hear otherwise, that's the way I'll judge him. And if I meet him, I'm not going to be like, well, I won't like you because I disagree with your politics, or I won't even say I love you because I agree with your politics. That should have nothing to do with it. It's, how do you act? How do you behave? Not what do you believe?
I've had plenty of friends in my life who I don't agree with the thing they think or say politically, or, you see their posts on Facebook or Instagram or something, you go, oh, I wouldn't write that, but okay. But you get along with the person when you see them. It's a little ridiculous to say it that the way he phrased it. I was a big Tim Tebow, got a raw deal in the NFL guy, like, for a long time. It took really until he got cut by Chip Kelly and the Eagles, because my thought was if he can't work with Chip Kelly's offense, he's probably shouldn't be in the NFL. Okay, he got cut. I'll finally let this go. But he goes to the playoffs with the Denver Broncos, and that roster is so good, and then gets replaced by Peyton Manning. I mean, there's probably a group of FSU folks who think Jameis Winston got a raw deal in Tampa Bay too, right? Well, it's not often. Winston and TEBOW, two Heisman winners from the state, from Florida schools here, get replaced by Peyton Manning and Tom Brady in their careers, and then Manning goes on a couple years later to win the Super Bowl, take the Broncos to the Super Bowl a couple years later, and then ultimately win it at the hands with his defense. But Manning was not Peyton Manning his final year. So it would have been really interesting to see if Manning if he ends up staying in Indianapolis, if TEBOW gets an opportunity to stay put in Denver, because we've seen what John Elway did with choosing other quarterbacks. He wasn't exactly a fully adept at picking great quarterbacks out there in Denver, Colorado. But so TEBOW might have had a shot with that roster had like a once in a generation thing not happen almost. When I say once in a generation, just happening at Tom Brady, didn't it? But maybe a twice in a generation thing not happen where a quarterback leave his team of like 18 years to come out and play his final 3 years with that franchise and ultimately win the Super Bowl. That would have been a really interesting scenario if Manning never came to Denver to see what would have happened with Tim Tebow's pro career.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I look at it and I say, okay, Denver, and granted, TEBOW didn't play the entire year, but Denver scored 309 points the year that TEBOW had them 8-8, and they won that playoff game. So again, going 8-8, not necessarily a juggernaut. They immediately go 13-3, score 481 points. Then they go 13-3, score 606 points, lose in the Super Bowl. And that's the year where Manning was just going nuts. I think he threw for like 5,300 yards or something like that. And Demaryius Thomas, who retired today, actually was just lighting things up. And then things started to go backwards, and they wound up at 355 in 2015 when they won the Super Bowl. And obviously Manning was a shell of himself at that point. But at the same time,
that defense was nasty. And that's what I'm saying. So I think TEBOW with that roster, it could have been interesting. It could have been interesting.
I love your homerism. I love Tim Tebow. Total homer.
I'm a TEBOW defender until I die. I will defend Tim Tebow.
I love Tim Tebow. At the same time, the amount of talent that he was surrounded by in 2006, but especially in 2007 and 2008 was pretty ridiculous. And look, we can have that argument if we want. I think it's fun because you never really know. The issue that I have is, you got a lights out defense, but at the same time, just you look at the point differentials, you look at the points that are put up, you look at the points that were put up in TEBOW's games, it's significantly less. And here's the thing: when you have an opportunity to get an MVP quarterback, you go do it. And so if Tampa Bay had lost in the Super Bowl last year, would we accept an argument from Seminoles fans that Jameis Winston got a raw deal because Brady lost the Super Bowl? And like, let's say 3 years from now, Tampa wins the Super Bowl because their defense is playing fantastic, even though Brady's sort of on his last legs. I mean, essentially it's the same kind of thing, except in this case, Brady actually got the job done.
In almost any other season, the Jameis comparison is interesting though, because in any other season, Jameis keeps that job. If Tom Brady's not walking through the door, what are the odds of Tom Brady walking through the door? Same thing with TEBOW. It's just wrong time, wrong place almost a little bit. But
all I know is that for his entire career, Tom Brady has just been slightly better than Peyton Manning. And so it really does seem apropos that Manning would go to Denver and then would lose the Super Bowl when he's playing really, really well, and then would win the Super Bowl when the defense essentially wins it for him and Brock Osweiler's coming in, and you're like, well, should they keep Brock Osweiler in the game? And then Brady goes down to Tampa and immediately wins the Super Bowl when he changes. So just like when he was at Tennessee, Manning, almost good enough.
You can't spell Super Bowl without you. No, that doesn't work. All right. Well, anyway, so Brian Koppelman tweet has been addressed. You feel good about it, Will?
No, I want Koppelman to address it, but that's all right.
Okay. Maybe the prism through which you guys see the world is just so different. Maybe.
I don't know. I love Rounders, so I just hope he repents so I can watch.
I'm good with Billions
so
too.
Rounders.
Billions, pretty good show.
Yeah,
That's pretty good.
Takes all kinds, man. I will say right now that I default to thinking I would like Brian Koppelman until he proves me otherwise when I meet him face to face.
There you go. All right. Well, how open-minded. What a good message. What a way to end the show and head into this 4th of July week. Hey, everybody, thank you for checking out this show. Been a big support here on YouTube. We've really seen the support on our YouTube channel, Read and Reaction. Be sure to check out readandreaction.com. We got some Charlie Pell articles coming up this week, at least one, right? Well,
yep, we got Charlie Pell coming up. I'm assuming you'll have another reaction room up on the YouTube site, which is a research room. I'm sorry, up on the YouTube site. That's gotten a lot of good reaction as well. And certainly, if you like and subscribe, that helps us out. So please do that when you get the opportunity. If you like these stand up and holler episodes.
Yeah, the research room. We'll be talking about 5 key moments from the Dan Mullen era so far to date. So that was a fun episode to do with Robert Parker there. Thank you again for checking our show out. And we just want to say happy 4th of July to everybody out there. Enjoy your holiday weekend. Thank you for watching this episode of Stand Up and Holler. Be sure to subscribe to the Read and Reaction YouTube channel. Join our Patreon community at Read and Reaction for bonus content each week. And check out our website at readandreaction.com. I'm Nick Knutson, joined by Will Miles, and as always, go Gators.